My name is Jeanette. Standing in my living room, the silence was thick, only broken by the soft patter of rain against the window. The air was heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. My mother, Mrs. Thompson, had just left, the click of her heels fading into the distance. The legacy of our family, built on lies and control, seemed to shatter with each step she took. I remembered that fateful birthday dinner at the restaurant. It was supposed to be a celebration, but it turned into a nightmare. My mother, a domineering and calculating woman, leaned across the table with a smile that was more of a sneer. She whispered to my father, Mr. Thompson, a passive and compliant man who had always deferred to her. "While everyone's here, tell your son to go change the locks at her apartment." My brother, Ryan, who was 25 and always eager to please my mother, didn't question her. He just stood up and left as if it was the most normal thing in the world to invade my privacy on my birthday. I sat there, tracing my finger along the rim of my glass, pretending not to hear, but inside, my heart was pounding with anger and confusion. In our family, appearances were everything. My parents were part of the upper-class social circle in the city. They hosted fancy parties, and in the Christmas photos, we all looked like the perfect family with our matching clothes and forced smiles. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. My mother was the puppet master, pulling the strings to maintain our so-called perfect image. Ryan was her golden child, and I was always the one who had to keep quiet and not ruin anything. If Ryan made a mistake, it was forgiven. But if I so much as missed a family event, I was declared selfish. I had always tried so hard to gain my mother's approval, thinking that if I worked harder, achieved more, she would finally see me as she saw Ryan. But her control only grew stronger. That night at the restaurant, I could tell it was all pre-planned. The seating arrangement had Ryan next to my father and me sitting across like an outsider. Even the cake was Ryan's favorite flavor, not mine. My mother wanted witnesses to her power play. When Ryan left the table, I excused myself to the restroom. Looking at myself in the mirror, I saw a calm exterior, but inside, I was a storm. By the time I returned, an hour had passed. Ryan came back, pale as a sheet and shaking. "Mom, there's something," he stammered. My mother's smile vanished, and my stomach dropped. He hesitated, his eyes darting to me. "There's police tape around her door." The table fell silent. My mother's fork slipped from her hand. I sat there, frozen, realizing that this was just the beginning. The drive home was endless. The streetlights flashed like cold, steady heartbeats. My phone buzzed non-stop with calls from my mother, father, and Ryan, but I ignored them. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, I saw 2 police cruisers parked near the entrance. The blue and red lights pulsed against the brick walls, and my stomach twisted in knots. A uniformed officer, Officer Lewis, approached me. "Ms. Thompson? I'm Officer Lewis. Are you the tenant of Unit 306? I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper.
"Yes."
"What's going on?" He checked his notes. "We received a report of a break-in. Your door was forced open, but nothing appears to be stolen. We've sealed it for investigation." I was in shock. Who would break into my apartment? Then it hit me. The officer asked if I knew anyone who might have a copy of my keys. I whispered, "My brother, Ryan Thompson." Officer Lewis glanced up sharply. "And why would your brother have your keys?" My throat tightened. "Because my mother told him to." He stared at me for a moment, his pen hovering. "Told him to do what?" "Change my locks," I said. He exhaled through his nose and wrote something down. "That's quite an instruction. You didn't give permission?" I nodded. "No, I didn't. He said they would review the building footage and that I should stay with someone that night." But I couldn't move. Through the cracked door, I saw my living room. Everything seemed intact, but the photos of me and my son, Jake, on the wall had been turned face down one by one. On the coffee table, there was a single white envelope. Officer Lewis handed me gloves and said I should open it. Inside was a short printed message. "Tell your mother the truth always finds its way home." My fingers trembled. I knew those words were a warning to my mother. I barely slept that night. The next morning when my phone rang, I thought it was my mother. It was Officer Lewis instead. He said they had traced a payment made to a man named Carl Johnson, the building's maintenance assistant. The payment came from a bank account under my mother's name. I was furious. My mother, who had always preached about reputation and integrity, had hired someone to break into my apartment to retrieve something. I remembered the box I had found in my closet last month while cleaning. It was labeled Dad's business papers, but inside were property deeds, statements, and wire transfers with my signature forged on them. I had initially thought it was a mistake, but now I realized it was all part of their scheme. By late afternoon, I made up my mind. I texted my mother. Dinner. My place. 7 p.m. No games this time. She replied instantly, fine, but be ready for the truth. When 7 o'clock rolled around, the knock on the door was light and deliberate, just like her. My mother stepped in, her expensive perfume and air of confidence filling the room. You shouldn't have involved the police, she said. I crossed my arms. You shouldn't have hired a man to break into my home. Her lips tightened. You don't understand what's happening. Then explain it, I demanded. She glanced around, her eyes lingering on the flipped photos. Those papers you found, your father's business, isn't simple. Carl was supposed to retrieve them quietly before you did something reckless. I laughed softly. You mean before I found out you've been using my name to hide your fraud? Her face hardened. Watch your tongue, Jeanette. But this time I didn't back down. No, Mom, watch yours. Thunder rolled outside, as if the sky was waiting for this confrontation. Rain streaked across the window, sliding down in crooked lines that caught the light from the street lamps. My mother stood in the middle of the living room, perfectly put together in her designer clothes and expensive jewelry. If guilt had a look, she had it. I was protecting you, she said, her voice calm but with an edge. I tilted my head. By breaking into my home? She started pacing. Your father's business has complications, partnerships that can't be made public. If those papers were discovered, it would ruin us. Us? Or just you? I asked. Her eyes narrowed. Don't twist this. Everything your father and I have done was to secure this family's future. I scoffed. You used my name, Mom. You forged my signature on property deeds and transfer forms. You didn't secure the future. You stole it. Her voice rose. You think you're some kind of victim. Everything we have, you've benefited from. Your college tuition, your first car, that apartment. I said, each word sharp, I paid for that apartment myself. You just couldn't stand that something had my name on it without your control. For the first time, her expression flickered. It was fear, the fear of losing control. She turned towards the window. Jeanette, listen to me carefully. If those documents go public, your father could face prison time. I folded my arms. Maybe he should. She spun back around. You wouldn't dare. I already did, I said softly. Officer Lewis has them. Her face drained of color. What? You wanted the truth out of my house. I delivered it to the police. Lightning flashed across the glass, cutting her silhouette in half. For a moment, she didn't look like my mother. She was just a trapped woman. You're destroying your family, she whispered. I stepped closer.
No, Mom.
You did that the moment you used me as your shield. She shook her head, stepping back as if I'd struck her. You don't understand what you're doing. I do, I said. I'm setting boundaries, something you never taught me how to do. The air between us was thick with tension. Her eyes glistened with rage. You think you're strong because you've got the law on your side. You're naive. The world doesn't care about your little revenge. I looked at her steadily. It's not revenge, Mom. It's accountability. She laughed coldly. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, but at least it'll be my regret. She stood there, her chest rising and falling fast. Finally, she said, if you go through with this, you'll never have a family again. I met her gaze. Then maybe it's time I build one worth having. She froze, her face hardening. Without a word, she turned and walked towards the door. Before she reached the handle, I said, one more thing. You asked why someone flipped the photos in my apartment. Maybe because even strangers can tell which way is right side up. Her hand trembled just once before she pulled the door open and disappeared into the storm. The next morning, I met Officer Lewis at the station. I was still damp from the rain, and the air was heavy with the smell of the storm. He greeted me with a nod. "You're sure about this?" "I'm done covering for them," I said.
He slid a folder towards me.
Inside were photos of the documents, copies of the bank statements, and confirmation that my parents' assets were being frozen pending investigation. "Once this goes to the Financial Crimes Division," he said, "they'll open a full case. You'll be cleared of all liability." I exhaled slowly. "Good."
He hesitated.
"You know this will make headlines." "I know," I said, "but at least they'll be true." By the time I left the precinct, the clouds were breaking apart, and sunlight was starting to peek through. When I picked up Jake from the daycare, he ran into my arms, showing me the gold star on his shirt. "Mom, look, I got a star for being brave." I smiled. "So did I, sweetheart. You just can't see mine yet." We drove home in silence, his little hand resting on my arm. The world outside smelled fresh and new. When we got back, I made pancakes, the kind he loved. He chattered about his day at daycare, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. News spread quickly. Within a week, every local news outlet was reporting on the prominent Thompson couple under federal review for identity fraud. My phone rang non-stop with calls from journalists, lawyers, and relatives pretending to check in, but I ignored them all. My father resigned from his company the same day the investigation went public. The company issued a one-line statement about health reasons. My mother vanished from her social circles, charity events, and book clubs. For her, silence was the harshest punishment. Officer Lewis called a few days later. "You've been fully cleared, MS.
Thompson.
The case is moving forward." "Thank you," I said, "for believing me." He paused. "You didn't need me to believe you. You just needed to believe yourself." I looked around my living room. It had been invaded, violated, but now it was mine again. I poured myself a cup of coffee and opened the window. The sounds of the city filled the air, a reminder that the world was moving on. That weekend, I invited a few close friends over for dinner. We didn't talk about my parents. We didn't need to. One of my friends, Sarah, raised her glass and said, "To freedom and to never apologizing for protecting yourself." I smiled. "I'll drink to that." Later, after everyone left, I tucked Jake into bed. He mumbled, half asleep, "Are we safe now, Mom?" I brushed his hair back. "Yes, baby, we are." He sighed and drifted off. And for the first time in years, I truly believed those words. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen window. Jake sat at the table, kicking his legs and covered in syrup. I flipped pancakes, watching the light move across the floor, creating new boundaries for us. I'd spent so long trying to keep the peace, but now I knew that peace was something I had to claim for myself. As I poured coffee, I looked at Jake and smiled. This time, the locks stay mine.